Welcome to the second installment of Premise Factory, where I give you premise idea for free in hope that you will use it to help me change the anime industry for the better. This week, if you like my idea of metafiction and want to write something similar, this is the one for you. The premises we have today will be based in Metacommentary. Do you remember, being meta doesn't just mean bashing on things you don't like, it is looking on, analyzing and understanding what made each thing work, analyzing and understanding the importance and influence of fiction, and so forth. This project is meant to inspire you to lend a hand in increasing the light novel industry's quality standards, which I believe can also help the anime out of its current crisis. Please check my video series on the topic out if you had not watched it yet. Like always, I can't assure 100% that no one else has ever done a story similar or exactly like this before, so if you choose to write about it, maybe it would help to try and check first if someone else has done it before, or you can just go ahead if you think you feel confident that you can give your story its own unique taste. Now let's dive in, shall we? This is set in a fantasy world where everyone is a writer. Not in the sense that everyone's literal occupation is writing novels. Everyone's just still free to do whatever job they want, but it is more of a cultural thing that everyone is expected from a young age to write some form of story. A story that captures their life and philosophy, which they can use to tell the others. A person's story is a window peeking into their psychology. It is a vessel to convey one thought on the meaning of life, conflicts, growth, ideals, relationships, beliefs, the end, and so forth. To have such story is a thing one holds close to one's identity. People in this world exchange these fiction as a means to get to know each other, as well as record them, be it through writing, voice recording, or magic so the story can be buried with them when they die. So the future generation may use it to learn who they were and how to live their life. Like Facebook, I guess, if Facebook is actually more meaningful and actually worth looking at. And no, a person's story can't just straight up be their autobiography. Since they live in a world people obsessed with the art of crafting and telling stories, everyone should be compelled to write a story that is more abstract, more poetic, and based on metaphors and symbolisms than just simple, the protagonist represents me and the characters are everyone I know. A story in this world represents who you are, so anyone would want to dress it up as grand while being truthful to themselves, like drawing a portrait that captures one's life in one picture. That's why it's not like it's impossible for you to just flat out have an autobiography without any poetry or symbolisms, but more than anything, that will reflect on your self-esteem, on how you view your own life. I'd recommend two characters as potential protagonists here. You can pick whichever one you like more, or you can just use both as a double protagonist story, have them travel together or separately, or have even more protagonists to represent something else if you want. The first is a simple youth who still have no clue what story they should write about. As a child, they simply has yet to experience enough of the world to form a solid worldview to base a story upon, which is why they are traveling the world in a self-searching journey to know themselves better and to write a story out of it. This self-searching journey can just be a common thing for all youths of this world to do, so they can all write their stories, or more realistically, it would be a unique decision by the protagonist. All the other kids would have been perfectly satisfied with staying at home and allowing their worldview to grow in such confined space, which would possibly just end up in their worldview and therefore the story they write to be not much different from their parents. The other protagonist is an adult amnesiac who woke up without knowing who they are. Yet upon waking up, they discovered a recording of the story written by themselves prior to the memory loss. But since a recorded story is an abstract one, the amnesiac must try to decode it in order to rediscover his past identity, just who he was and what built him up to be where he was prior to the memory loss. That is why he also sets out on a journey. It could be that he finds the story he recorded to have been a gruesome one filled with death and despair, so when he managed to decode it and finds that he has been a bad person prior to his memory loss, and therefore arrives to the conclusion that He no longer is that person and will move forward to write his own entirely new story. Or the story could be a hopeful one, which he later discovers to be something he clung onto during his harsh time of life, the one constant he can believe in as his everlasting source of hope. Or he may never manage to find out what it means, but arrives to the conclusion that the how doesn't matter as long as the story can inspire himself and the others. The protagonist can travel either alone or together through this journey where they can learn more about the craft of storytelling. I guess this is where you could fit in lessons about real fiction writing and narratology. How to break a story into a 3-act structure, the use of narrative techniques, plot device, continuity, genres, archetypes, stock characters, world building, and tropes. All the simple stuff. You'd be surprised how many people, even Japanese people themselves, have no clue about how any of it works. You might even be able to create a magic system on this theme. Perhaps the people in this world can use magic that correlates to their personal story, both in daily life and in combat. A person who writes a war story might be able to use it to create a sword out of words. A person who writes a love story might be able to heal the others. A person who writes a mystery story might be able to use it to deceive people. And a person who writes comedy might be able to use it to charm others. You might be able to create auto characters based on this concept. Like a comic relief who decided to write a comedy because he was lonely and wanted friends. He didn't want to have his personal story, the reflection of his identity, be one of isolation. Though on that note, you should also make sure that it is either forbidden or at least very much frowned upon to write your story just for practical purposes. You can't have a kingdom force its people to write war stories in order to build an army. You can write a story out of your personal want, but there should be a limiter that you can't just precisely tune your story for a desired effect. You can make it so that maybe you can indeed create a sword out of the war story, but it's going to be very weak if it doesn't actually reflect your own identity. So on that front, while you should make it so that the king can force people to write the stories he wants, you can make it so that he can use propagandas to influence the others subtly, shaping their worldview and indeed, their genuine identity to how he wants. That would far better reflect the theme of the power of storytelling than him just locking up people in dungeons until they write a war story for him. Am I being confusing here? On that front, the amnesiac protagonist would have either the gruesome or hopeful war stories of theirs, which would turn into a powerful weapon they can use in combat to protect the younger protagonist, though they cannot unlock its full power until they actually know what its full meaning is. In this journey, the protagonist can run into other colorful denizens of the world with their own personal stories, where they would have to figure out what their stories mean in order to be able to help them. This can either be something like a riddle the storyteller gives them, or be an indication that not even the one who wrote the story are always fully aware of what their writing means. This story, of course, is meant to emphasize the importance of the fiction in our world. I'm always an advocate that fiction is an important part of human society, that it is important to teach and inspire people, that there is no shame in deriving hope and comfort from fiction, that just because it's not real doesn't mean it can't be influential. But this story would also show the light that if you use it merely for self-gratification, then indeed fiction can become harmful, that it can warp your worldview for the worse. It's meant to show the importance of both fiction and being able to look at it constructively. On another level, it is also about identity and self-reflection. How do you craft an identity to differentiate yourself from the others? Are you fine with having a story that ended up being a dime a dozen? Or in the reverse, what is the harm in wanting to be different just so your story won't end up overlapping with someone else's? What does a story tell about a person's perspective towards self-reflection? Do most people just see it as a source of narcissism, like how people call Facebook and Instagram? Or do they use it to self-explore and discover a spot within themselves they otherwise would never be able to think of? And like social media, how much can an outsider actually gauge about a person just by looking at their story? It's no secret that, 2020 also led me down the VTuber hole the same way it did many of you. If you don't know what VTubers are, they are essentially YouTubers who use moving anime avatars to stream. If you know Kisuna-ai is like that. Though I can't fully say I was a fan of any prior to 2020. I have been listening to their covers of songs in 2017 because that's just what I needed when trying to find something to put on in the background when I write. But again, I don't watch any of their other content, so I just treat them no different than others who cover songs. Currently, Santori Nomu and Machitashima are my favorite when it comes to the music category, by the way. It wasn't until a certain doggo dragged me in with her attempt to communicate in English that I started to give them a chance. And now, I think I can say I'm a proud Watamate. But anyway, into the story. The protagonist is a girl who is unattractive and shy that she could not talk to people in public, though she has a knack for voice acting. Which is why one day, out of some external mean, perhaps a friend of hers is also doing VTubers and is making some good money. I mean, seriously, have you seen a VTuber suddenly getting paid 100k yen just for sneezing? Which is why she encouraged the protagonist to also try the VTuber gig out, if for the sake of improving her communication skills. The protagonist does so, adopting a new persona as a genki and encouraging girl, someone she wanted to be but literally could never be in real life. With her voice acting talents, the protagonist's popularity exploded soon enough. One day, she finds out that the boy she has a crush on at school, an otherwise sporty and smart guy, is a massive VTuber fan, and as it turns out, he is actually genuinely in love with her character. The story runs on the shenanigans of this dynamics. The protagonist is overjoyed that the boy she has a crush on likes her as a VTuber, but believes that he won't like her for who she is, and will stop being her fan if he ever finds out. It's the classic Peter Parker Spider-Man Mary Jane dynamic, and yeah, I know it's kinda already common at this point, but the important thing is how you explore it in further depth. The implications and themes of the relationship and the other characters. The boy, while he may seem perfect at first, why would he fall in love with a VTuber? He's a Chad who can get with any girl he wants, so why would he choose a VTuber? A delusion or a reality? Is he broken? Is it reflective of how he feels like, despite all the praises and adoration he gets, he could never be as good as he wanted? Was it because he too used to be ugly and undesirable, and worked hard to become attractive, only to find that all the affection he got now is shallow and hollow, that no one really wanted to know him for who he is, and like the protagonist, they only love him for his mask. When the protagonist learns more and more about this boy, she will also discover that he is actually way far from the idealized prince she thought he would be. Here, you can explore the theme of escapism for both characters, how sticking to reality doesn't always help, and how both characters actually found better lives thanks to escapism. And then there's the personal style's Jungian psychology of people putting up a mask between what they project and what their true selves are. Likewise, her friend who is also a VTuber, what's her stance on the whole thing? She invited the protagonist to become a VTuber for the sake of money, so maybe she's the exploitative greedy type who plays a sexy VTuber avatar just to get the money, while in reality, she ridicules her own sims. But in an ironic twist, she might be well known for gacha games where she dumps into viewers' money to roll SSR characters, while she herself has a big crush on sim celeb like a seiyuu or movie star. It's to reflect the biases of the celebrity culture. How her fan put her on a pedestal without knowing who she really is, while she herself also put someone else on a pedestal without knowing who they really are. Her arc might be her learning not only to see her fan more as people, but to also lack her own act, dropping the moe act to become her more true, crude, swearing self, which turns out to win even more fans than before, for how funny and relatable she can be, instead of acting like a one-dimensional doll all the time. You can also throw in several other characters either as supporting to spice things up, or perhaps make the main cast as well. Here are some ideas. A VTuber team like Hololive or TCChanji, where you can have dozens of VTubers collaborate together. This might be hard to pull off in a story since it entails a massive cast, but maybe having some characters be affiliated in one without showing all the members might just be fine. A VTuber who specialized in singing. Someone who used to just cover songs online but never got popular until she adds a singing avatar and then suddenly becomes far more successful than she ever has been. The boyfriend who was her video editor but soon finds himself jealous of all the attention she is getting from the other men, so he started his own VTuber avatar to try and assert himself as her boyfriend, to a mix of success and backlash from both his own girlfriend, her fanbase, and his own new fanbase. Another couple of guy-girl VTubers who play games together, either by backseat gaming or two players, and their VTuber avatars are couples who get along well, though in real life they actually hate each other. This could mean they just are tsundere for each other, or it could mean they genuinely are having a toxic relationship, that they were dating in real life when they started VTuber channel together, have a fight and broke up in real life, but since the signature of their channel is that their fans ship them together, they have no choice but to continue keeping the act up. The weird comic relief guy who just play all the obscure and weird games and makes shitposts all day, who turns out to be a real dapper gentleman who has a good insight on people and can give great life advices. He might only have this chaotic mode when he's got drunk, which is exactly how he streams his shows. A VTuber who picks some kind of over-the-top character like a mad scientist or evil wizard, or eldritch abomination plotting world domination and always go in 120% on the role-playing, even when it ended up annoying other VTubers or even viewers. This character might actually be clinging to this role so much because it otherwise is the only chance he gets to break away from the monotony of adult life. A divorced 45-year-old single mother who used a lowly VTuber avatar to make herself feel young and desirable again, to the chagrin of her children. A VTuber who struggles despite being as talented as everyone else. Trust me, it doesn't take much digging to see that VTuber is already an oversaturated market, and there are many other talented people who are being buried despite doing the same thing as the big names. Out of this, you can either make a rom-com that focuses more on comedy and everyone's relationship never really changes, or you can make it a drama with heavy plot. There are plenty of drama that can be derived from VTubers, from how to find success, stories of both good and toxic fans, how they would react if they somehow found out that the protagonist legit has a crush on a certain fan among them, something like that. D&D has gotten big, or it always has been. I'm not sure, but while I was kinda new it existed, I thought D&D was just a really niche thing and had just recently regained its fame in the past few years. That may have something to do with me growing up with a Game Boy and a PlayStation, so analog gaming just wasn't something I paid much attention to until now. In retrospective, I guess it is very apparent just how many big title stories, animes and otherwise, are very much inspired by tabletop RPG. Though at the same time, that just begs the question, why isn't there a story centered around people playing D&D? I mean, yeah, there's Stranger Things which framed things around D&D, and the final battle of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters was the team playing D&D's game against Baccarat, who is the DM. But D&D also is known to be the great playground for growing writers, and even mega writers like George R.R. Martin and Urobuchi Gen are known to play it. Well, yeah, there is the issue of copyright, but I mean, if I recall correctly, both Yu-Gi-Oh! And Stranger Things avoid this issue by never directly name-dropping Dungeons & Dragons, the game itself. I mean, there's a ton of other non-D&D tabletop RPGs out there that use a similar system as D&D, so I guess that should be enough to keep the Wizard of the Coast from suing you, regardless of how blatant it is. And yes, I know there is another reason why stories centered around playing D&D aren't popular, but we'll leave that for later. Let's get into the premise. The story is simply about a group playing D&D together. This could be anything. Maybe the protagonist wants to be a novelist and is exactly using D&D as a testing ground for his writing. Maybe the protagonist is hired to be the DM for a competitive level D&D game. Maybe it's a group of celebrities coming to play D&D together, perhaps even live streaming it. Maybe it's a dad who picked D&D up for the first time in 20 years to use it to bond with his kids. Maybe the group is actually a squad of soldiers playing D&D during their downtime in a war zone, where things in the campaign is juxtaposed by what is happening in real life. Any of this works, so if you like any of them, give them a shot, go ahead. Though you saw the predator of the premise, the story I want to present you is that of D&D as a therapy. The protagonist is a psychiatry student, which for her last project is assigned a group of problematic antisocial kids and is told to sort their problems out. The protagonist decides that in order to figure the kids out using an amicable approach, she will play D&D with them. After all, using D&D for therapy to help socially inept people to adjust is a real thing, and is actually one of the most inspiring examples of gaming improving people's life. Anyway, so she sets up a campaign and now has to figure out just what is wrong with each kid. Get them all to cooperate, set up encounters to exactly challenge them in that area, while making sure the game is entertaining for everyone. Here's a handful of samples of kids I can offer. A kid playing Paladin because he wants to play the self-sacrificing hero, only to find that under pressure, his instinct may not be as altruistic as he thought. Additionally, he might also be struggling to get the others to respect him as a hero. An edgy kid lone wolf playing an Eldritch Knight or Rogue with a subtle murder hobo tendency because he doesn't like the idea of playing nice with others. If you don't know, murder hobos refers to the D&D playstyle of someone who just kills everything that comes in sight, including NPCs who might otherwise be integral to the plot. A kid with an inflated ego and an over-the-top attitude who made a Gary Stu character, expecting to go into the game dominating everything and be loved by everyone, only to get angry when things actually prove to be difficult for him. He doesn't have to be an annoying character. In fact, he could just be the character who's so full of himself to a comedic degree, like Soul Eater's Blackstar. A hikikomori girl who plays cleric because she doesn't want to go out front, yet is always too nervous and flustered and struggles to find a balance between healing her teammates for the slightest scratch, that she runs out of spell slots, and trying to conserve her spell slots so much that she puts her teammates in steep risk. Additionally, she might also struggle with the fact that, as a charisma caster class, the cleric is effectively forced into the diplomatic role despite her not wanting to even talk to the NPCs. A rule-obsessed girl playing any of the int or wisp spellcasting classes, she wants to be the strategist of the team but will constantly get annoyed when they don't follow her suggestion to a T. Additionally, she could also be the rules lawyer, the one who puts conserving the rule above having fun, even more so than the DM. A popular idol girl who plays an orc barbarian. She has an image problem, hating the social pressure expecting her to be a pristine perfect girl all the time, that she just wants to play a character who is the opposite of herself. A brute who can just take his anger out on the world. Now coming to the game, I find the story to actually be quite difficult to make entertaining, main reason being the D&D game itself. There's a reason why Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga regularly use bullshit rules even after the rule of the card game is solidified. There's a reason why cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime may have completely different power and effects than it does in the real game. On one hand, it's because of balance. A card game villain has to be intimidating by using overpowered cards, but in the real world where no one is, well, presumably villainizing others out of card games, balance becomes the first priority. The issue is that real D&D games is slow. A battle in D&D can take up whole sessions. A turn of combat in D&D is supposed to represent less than 10 seconds, but can easily take up half an hour in real life. It doesn't really make for an entertaining viewing experience unless you see real people doing the acting and discussing, and in text form can literally eat up dozens of pages where other details such as keeping tracks of character turns and position would further bog the pace down that it wouldn't make for a much entertaining read. For this, you could substitute D&D system with just video game JRPG mechanics where everyone can move at once, but then it'd be no different than the other MMO stories, only that there's a DM. But then you would also lose the one big aspect of D&D, which is the dice. Anyone who has enjoyed D&D knows that the biggest moments of triumphs and defeats or when the dice decides to either hand you that epic success or epic fail. So perhaps this story might be best told in visual form, where you can just bring up the dice whenever it is going to cause drastic results. Other times when they just roll average numbers, you don't really have to show it. But of course, since the goal of the story is to make all the kids become more socially adjusted, you should also give a good significance to the others hefty aspect of D&D. Talking and diplomacy. Despite them being heavily inspired in D&D, you hardly see a diplomacy coming into play in Overlord and Goblin Slayer. I mean, well, there's certainly a lot of talking with NPCs, but Goblin Slayer doesn't really do anything except accept quests, and I never really has to negotiate as much as just order people around. There really weren't any classic D&D situations where the party is surrounded by overwhelming enemies and has to talk their way out of those stories. So I think it is important that in this one, you should also give the clear message that fighting is not always the only nor the best option. The important part of D&D is to make sure that even the less combat prone characters can have as much significance to the party, being the negotiator to help the party in the way the knuckleheads can't. Then there is also the interpersonal drama between the party you can have. Of course, since they're all teenagers, you can just do the typical love dodecahedron thing, or just platonic growing friendship if that's more your thing. So play up the double narratives, one inside the campaign and one on the players. But of course, since the main idea of the story is about the therapy, the campaign story should be treated as the secondary concern. Though since a big hurdle of the protagonist is to make the campaign entertaining to the kids, I think it is important that the campaign story is also enjoyable to the audience. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just your typical story to fight the demonic lord. Let the character dynamics carry the rest. So there we have it, 3 premises today. Again, some are clearly more filled in and better than the other, but the rest is up to you to pick up. One thing I would advise is that if you want to hop on these projects, you should be well versed in Japanese enough to be able to write in natural sounding dialogues. About into in the JLPT. If not, then I hope you have someone else who is very good in Japanese to help translate for you. Or if you don't think you want to write but still want to help, then feel free to donate to my Patreon. Every single penny from there will be used for the self-publishing and promoting of my books. Also, please show support through the change.org page, links in the description below. For the next premise factory, we will be going back to the isekai. This time, let's focus on the setting itself, but gimmicks to help spice up and make even an average fantasy world feel fresh. Next week, we will be diving into the first story I've wrote. A story where only psychopaths can have superpowers. A story set for a JoJo-style 9-parter, Botoku no Uchronia, or Blasphemous Uchronia. Also coming out next week, we'll be discussing Shaman King 2021 and a few fixes I wish to see from the manga. So if you are interested, please subscribe, and once again, if you hadn't watched it yet, please check out the video series discussing why light novels are stereotypically bad and how we can work together to fix it. Thank you for watching, and let's meet again.